Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Vital Ground's second webinar of the fall. My name is Matt Hart. I am the communications director here at the Vital Ground Foundation. Delighted to be joined this evening by my coworker Monica Hall from our development department and our guest of the evening, Diane Boyd, a longtime Montana wolf biologist and more recently an author of this great book, A Woman Among Wolves, that we'll be hearing about and hearing some passages from tonight. So I just want to take a moment to thank everyone for taking time this evening to join. We got over 50 people here already, and I'm sure we'll have a few more trickling in. And it's just great to see everyone turn out on a weeknight and a busy time going into the holidays. And I think we'll have a real treat hearing from Diane in a few minutes here. Just in terms of the order of operations for the evening, I'll give a quick introduction to Diane and we'll turn it over to her for the bulk of the hour. But we'll have some good time at the end for question and answer. Um, as Diane is talking, if there's a question that comes up for you, you can see the Q&A function on our Zoom webinar by hovering over the bottom of the screen. And you can use that Q&A function to type out a question. And Monica and I will keep an eye on the questions as they come in. Um, and then we'll have Diane answer as many of them as we can have time for. For any other, comments, you can use the chat function as well. But for the questions to be answered by Diane, use that Q&A button. I think that's all the logistics I can think of. Monica, any last thoughts on the logistical side?
No, I think you covered it. I think it'll be a great evening.
All right, great. Well, I'm seeing lots of familiar names popping in on the attendees list. I know a few of my other colleagues from the Vital Ground staff are joining us as well incognito. So, hi, Kim Davitt. And yeah, we're excited to have Diane, and we'll get going here now that people have had a couple extra minutes to trickle in. Um, when I heard we were going to have Diane on. I thought of Doug Chadwick pretty quickly, as someone who has known Diane for a long time. Um, Doug can't be with us tonight because he's off community organizing with Wild Montana up in the Flathead Valley. But he wrote the introduction to A Woman Among Wolves. And so I will read a few of his words as part of my own introduction of Diane for the evening. Um, but just even more broadly, Diane is joining us. Diane, are you up the North Fork right now or in
No,
Kalispell?
I'm in my home in Kalispell.
Okay, great. Well, Diane is a longtime Montana scientist. She holds a PhD in wildlife biology from the University of Montana. Go Grizz. And she lives in Kalispell and in her beloved cabin in the North Fork, which, if you've read the book already, you will know was a an amazing piece of work just to get that cabin built. Um, and so Diane has spent 4 decades working in wolf recovery and research. She's the author of many scientific papers, and this book, her memoir, is her first book publication. So we're really delighted that she's going to share some of it with us tonight. And yeah, like I said, Doug Chadwick is someone of a similar spirit to Diane. I think I can accurately say that, and I'll share a few words from Doug, who, for those who don't know, Doug Chadwick is a longtime founding board member of Vital Ground, dating back to the organization's founding in 1990, and is an author himself of numerous books and magazine articles, and a great naturalist and biologist. And so Doug writes, I was wandering the valley bottomlands. This is in the Flathead River Valley outside Glacier National Park in 1979 when I met Diane Boyd, a lone woman out searching for a lone female wolf named Kishanina. It was what she did nearly every day for 3 years running. Diane was well aware the animal she was tracking was no ordinary wolf. At the time, the only Canis lupus known to survive in the lower 48 states were in parts of northern Minnesota, where Diane first worked with this endangered mammal, and on an island in Lake Superior. Much of the public thinks the dramatic reappearance of wolves in the Mountain West after half a century was the result of a government program that released several dozen wolves from Canada into Yellowstone National Park in central Idaho during the mid-90s. Yet wolves had reintroduced themselves naturally to Montana's North Fork more than a decade earlier and were already beginning to spread through the region. The wolves' return to a landscape their kind had once roamed was the legacy of long solitary silver-gray Kishanina, plus a black male who found his way to her side early in 1982, and their offspring, the Magic Pack. A Woman Among Wolves is the real, full story of the species' comeback, a detailed account of the colonists that survived to hunt and howl beneath moonlit peaks, and of those that fell silent, mostly at the hands of people. Fast forwarding a little. Bushwhacking beside this scientist, that's you, Diane. You'll learn about the effects wolves can have on competing predators, scavengers, prey, and plant communities. You'll also find the new packs challenging human communities to rethink what saving America's wildlife heritage actually means. But by the time you finish reading A Woman Among Wolves, you'll understand the remarkable animals themselves more intimately and accurately than you might have imagined was possible. And this is the legacy of the lone woman I met decades ago out in a big wild valley on her quest for tracks of the lone wolf called Kishanina. So thanks to Doug Chadwick for those words, and thanks, Diane, for all your work and for joining us tonight. And I will turn it over to you.
Okay, thank you very much, Matt. So I'm going to share my screen with everybody, and I'm going to do a little bit of a PowerPoint, and then I'm going to do a little reading from my books, from my book, and then we'll open it for Q&A. So can you see this okay?
Yeah, it looks great.
See my first slide? Okay, so tonight I'm going to talk about wolves, grizzlies, and my book, A Woman Among Wolves. But we're going to start out first to talk a little bit about habitat and wildlife conservation through Vital Ground and the Seus family. You all know how remarkable they are. Whoops, it doesn't want to switch. Just a moment. There we go. So I was trying to remember when I first met Doug and Lynne, and I actually chatted with Lynne today and shared some photos with her. And I had pictures that went back to when their Great Pyrenees named Beau was a puppy. It was my first visit. And she says, well, that would have been 1987. She's got a great memory. So I guess my first visit was in 1987 before Vital Ground had even been founded. And when I arrived at their place, Doug Chadwick introduced me and said, yeah, you're going to love them. And I drove down and just showed up at their place with my scruffy dog. And Lynne says, well, come on in, honey. That's Lynne. Yeah, get a big bear hug from Doug. And she says, well, before we show you around, we got a couple of grizzly bear cubs that need feeding. Do you mind holding a bottle? It's like, no, I don't mind at all. So anyway, that was my introduction to Doug and Lynne, two of the most amazing people I've ever met and extremely passionate about grizzly bear conservation and conservation in general. So with that, I thought, well, I'm going to be there to see their wolves. That was kind of why I went. But of course, the bears come first. So this is my second visit with another set of cubs. And that's their Beau, their big Great Pyrenees dog. I've had bottle fed those cubs with them too. But I was so impressed with their conservation ethic, their passion for their work, and what a family operation it was. Their kids, Judd and Sasha, participated. Lynne and Doug did all this work, and Doug did a lot of the heavy lifting with Bart. I was just astounded to see this man and his bear Bart. The love and the trust and the bonding there is just remarkable. So they rolled and wrestled, and Lynne was there doing photo shoots. I mean, look at Doug in the picture on the right. It's like a 5-year-old at their birthday party. He's just so happy and grinning with Bart. And they were such wonderful times. So we went on, and Doug invited me to come into the wolf compound. And I said, oh my gosh, I've never been in with a pack of wolves. I've been tracking wild wolves in a while, but never been in a compound with these wolves. And he says, it's no problem. Just come in, and if they come over to you, just ignore them. So there I was, and these wolves would come up to me, and then Doug adds, and by the way, don't set anything on the ground. If you take off your gloves or the camera and they go on the ground, the wolves will get them, and I cannot get them away because you don't take things away from a wolf. And so, just kind of mind your P's and Q's. It's like, okay. So that was my introduction to their pack of wolves. I remember one named Peaches, and they had them all trained. And I have to tell you, I have never, ever, ever met anyone who has trained a wolf. Most people can't train their Labrador Retriever to sit still, and here this guy was with these wolves, and there was this intense respect. Here this wolf is on a mark. You can see his front paws are on a rock, and Doug trains wolves, bears, Lynn and family all help train all these animals, raccoons. I mean, it goes on and on. Badgers, antelope. It was such a remarkable experience for me, particularly. I was very moved. So that was all really fun and well, and Doug and Lynn had become quite famous, and they had some resources of making movies with their captive animals, and they decided that it was time to pay it forward eventually. And Doug et al. And Lynne and Seus began brainstorming about how they could better protect Bart's and the other bears they had, their wild brethren on the landscape where living was not easy. So they formed Vital Ground in about 1990, as you all know, because you're Vital Ground supporters. And that's what it moved forward. And I've been blessed to count Doug and Lynn amongst my friends for, oh my gosh, I guess 40 plus years. And I feel really blessed. And while all that was going on, back when grizzly were being protected and grizzly bear populations were expanding, wolves were beginning to do the same thing. I was also very honored to be Doug and Lynn's personal guest at their 35th celebration, 35th anniversary of the founding of Vital Grounds this September. And Doug and Lynn were absolutely overwhelmed with the turnout and the amount of money raised. It was phenomenal. There's Ryan and Doug giving each other a hug, and Lynn in the foreground. In that event, that one evening sitting there, I was amazed. The outpouring of love for Doug and Lynn, their family, and the grizzly bear and Vital Ground. They raised over $1 million in 2 hours to support and continue the work and protect grizzlies permanently forever. And to date, they've raised that much money, and they've actually protected through collaborative efforts over 1 million acres of grizzly bear habitat. So it's really a remarkable, more than a remarkable story. It's just based on passion. And while that is all great, is when you look at the Vital Ground Foundation and the protection of grizzly bear habitat, when you protect grizzly bears, you protect every species and landscape and habitat underneath that grizzly bears use. And that's where the connection is between wolves and bears. When you protect grizzly habitat, you're protecting all the other species as well. So it's great having them be the keystone species in this protection effort to begin helping everything. And of course, I'm a passionate person about wolves, but heck, who doesn't love grizzlies too, right? So with that, I'm going to launch into my story a little bit here. So I've come from Minnesota, as you can tell by my accent, and I was invited to University of Montana. I got a graduate research stipend to come out and study the first wolf in the Western history that ever had a radio color put on it. And this is her. This is actually the wolf, Kishnina, that Matt just read you from Doug Chadwick's foreword. She's captured, she's sedated, The Wolf Ecology Project team, put a radio collar on her. And that is the wolf that I was tracking when Doug Chadwick and I met for the first time in '79. And as he said, she was eventually found and joined by a black male, and they mated. They had a litter of pups, and the population just it kept growing, but not just because of those two. There were more wolves that all migrated down on their own steam from Canada. And probably it was from as far away as Jasper Park or beyond, because the Canadians, just like us, had killed all the wolves in southern British Columbia and Alberta. So this little fledgling group, the Wolf Ecology Project, kind of parallel to the early starts of Vital Ground, lived at a place called Moose City. That's my cohort, my colleague Mike Fairchild, who co-directed the project with me in the early years. That's my actual cabin, and I felt it was just home sweet home. Now it looks a little rustic and humble to me since I've gotten older and have a house with heat and electricity. And that meadow on the bottom right is the runway. It's actually just a big hayfield that we used to land the airplane on and track the wolves out of. It was such a glorious experience for me, coming from Minneapolis, and landing in this most amazing landscape. Wolves, grizzly bears, elk, wolverine, mountain lions. It had everything. It's a very intact ecosystem. And as we learned as time went on, these wolves recolonized northwest Montana via dispersal from Canada. And I have to say this twice, they were not brought here by humans. Not brought by humans. And I've heard from so many people that these are foreign wolves up in Montana, and the stories just get mixed up because of the reintroduction 15 years after wolves started coming back. So these wolf tracks are actually going by my cabin there at Moose City. And so we all began, and this work was a lot of hard effort by a whole bunch of college students and volunteers, and it was a really nice patchwork quilt of volunteer effort. And we got to watch the population in the West go from one wolf, Kishnina, up to about 3,000 presently in 2025. And I really feel it's the most remarkable endangered species recovery story that I can think of. And back in '79, when I arrived in Montana, if you would have asked me if I thought there'd ever be 1,000 wolves in Montana, I would have just sort of laughed and said, well, it's a novel idea, but here we are. We've got about 1,000 wolves in Montana now, out in the wild. But despite all the efforts and research information that we published on in the Wolf Ecology Project, we published lots of papers. Wolves were growing a lot. The population was expanding into Idaho. We had dispersers going all over the West. I just found that people just, not only did they not feel calmer about wolves, but the disparities have gotten stronger over the years. And I'm quite disappointed, to be real honest, that even with the amazing work and research that's been done by Yellowstone people, and I go there a couple times a year because I love watching wolves, that all this information is out there about what wolves are, and more importantly, what wolves are not. And yet, prejudices and hatred and the vitriol is only increasing over time and not decreasing. So as an academic and a researcher and a PhD and blah, 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 I thought, well, you know what? We need to reach people in a different manner. Obviously, something's not working. So maybe I'll write a little memoir and put the word out there. And it's not going to be scientific. It's going to be a memoir told from the heart. I was really motivated to write it because I have the privilege of having been here from the first wolf to 3,000 wolves in the West, including the natural colonizers and the reintroductions and all the expansion after that. I was going to write it to be objective and not preachy, and kind of like anybody in the grocery store could pick it up. It's that kind of a book. And my goal was to open minds with stories and weave the science through the stories. And I found Greystone Books was very interesting in publishing the story. So there you have it. Those are wolf tracks and my ski tracks. The circle is my cabin on the riverbank on the North Fork of the Flathead. And Doug Chadwick and I were neighbors and colleagues and friends all these years in the North Fork. It's great. We still are. A lot of stories in the book. They're fun to read. Some of them are sad, but most of them are pretty fun and insightful. Here I am having lunch in a blizzard while we're out on snowmobiles looking for wolf tracks. And my bottom line goal for this book was just to teach people to chill out about wolves, because as Dave Meach said, the wolf is neither devil nor saint, except in the eyes of the viewer. It's all about perceptions, reality versus myth. So with kind of that as my goals stated in my background, I just wrote my heart out, and I completed this book, and it was published a year ago, in September of 2024. It's been real popular. And if you want to learn about what it's like to be a wolf biologist back in the good old days, and then bring up to modern times, because I bring it up right up to 2023 or 24 when I published it, the challenges of having wolves in the landscape, here's your chance. So with that, I'm going to stop the share, and I'm going to just read you a couple excerpts from my book, and then I'll be happy to answer any questions. So, okay, Matt, are we ready to go? The screen's okay and everything's good?
Yeah, working great.
Okay. So I'm just going to start with just the very short little paragraph. The first page of my introduction, page 1, paragraph 1, to give you a little flavor of my book. So, and then after that, I'm going to go into a couple of readings that I've never done in public that just deal with wolves and grizzly bears, because, hey, we're all here because of bears, right? So that'll be a little different path that I'll be doing for you guys tonight. My pickup banged and rattled along the potholed inside road in the northwest corner of Glacier National Park. Boxes of wolf traps and jars of bait slid across the truck bed. I was in a hurry, my mind focused on the wolf caught in a trap somewhere ahead in the lodgepole pine forest. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed motion in my rearview mirror. I looked up to catch the glassy reflection of vivid yellow eyes framed by a wolf's black face looking over my shoulder from the back seat. How did I get here? And then I tell you through the rest of the book how I got there. And anyway, it's a long journey. It says through 40 years of wolf recovery, but it's actually 50. So I will just read this part with the grizzly bear wolf portions now to you. And I'll try and be articulate. And when I'm done, I would love to open it up for questions. And I love questions and answers. So if you're good with that, we're good to go. In the North Fork, there was a third large predator battling wolves and mountain lions for food, the grizzly bear. It became a numbers game for which animals had the most mass, attitude, and fortitude at a kill to determine who would possess the spoils. A pack of wolves may or may not successfully defend a kill against a larger grizzly. One October, I watched from the safety of our circling Cessna as a large male grizzly defended the carcass of a bull elk against 7 hungry wolves. I don't know if the wolves had originally killed the elk, or if it had been wounded by hunters, gotten away and died, or if possibly the grizzly killed it. The grizzly lay on top of the elk, looking menacingly at the circling wolves, no doubt vocalizing its displeasure with deep throaty rumblings. For their part, the wolves circled excitedly, tails high and waving, feinting small lunges toward the elk. One bold gray wolf suddenly dashed in and grabbed at the elk, which provoked the bear into charging and chasing the daring wolf into the trees. As soon as the bear was preoccupied with chasing the thieving wolf, the other 6 wolves all bounded to the elk carcass and savagely tore off and gulped down hunks of meat. Suddenly, the bear stopped as a light bulb went off in his bruin brain, and he looked back at the elk and saw that he had been duped. The grizzly charged back to the elk, the wolf scattered, and the bear settled in on top of the elk again. The wolf circled and taunted the grizzly, and then a black wolf crept in to sneak a bite of elk steak. The enraged bear launched off the elk and chased the black wolf into the woods as it ran just out of reach. Once again, the remaining wolves rushed in and swarmed the elk, voraciously ripping off pieces of flesh and gulping them down until the bear roared back to guard his banquet. I saw this happen 3 times, involving at least 2 different wolves, which made me wonder if this was a tried and true strategy for this wolf pack or for all wolf packs. I don't know who eventually ended up with more meat, the wolves or the grizzly, but I put my money on the wily wolves. Tracking wolves on skis in the North Fork gave us opportunities to read these epic carnivore encounters more easily in the snow. Through a dozen winters, keen field observers on the Wolf Ecology Project crew, the mountain lion research team, and the grizzly group found hundreds of kills and pieced together a fascinating account of who was who in the carnivore world. I was amazed to see grizzly bear tracks every month of the year. I had naively presumed that these bears would be comfortably sleeping in their dens and I would be safe skiing wolf trails in 3 feet of snow. I often wondered if the additional bonanza of wolf carrion caused a few grizzlies to give up denning in favor of food rewards during the cold season. Did grizzlies stay out all winter before wolves recolonized the area? Was it all bears adopting this strategy or just a few? The wandering winter grizzly tracks we observed were always large single males. Some of the prints were as long as my 11-inch ski boot, and we never saw tracks of young bears or family groups in the snow. I thought it would be fascinating to radio collar these winter bears and find out more about them. Were they old, starving, sick, healthy, cantankerous, or adventurous? The same individuals or different bears each winter? I knew that the Camas pack, formerly part of the Magic Pack, had made a kill near Hidden Meadow because of radio tracking signals from the North Fork Road. Their collar signals didn't move for 3 days, and then the wolves left the area. Wolves are relentlessly restless in their hunting efforts and territory maintenance to repel any trespassing wolves. Territory marking to convey this land is taken is a daily activity along with finding food to support the pack. Wolves don't stay put unless they have a big pile of meat to feed on. So on this cold January day, I waded the river in chest waders, the ice chunks bumping into my legs as the river flowed into and around me. Using my ski poles for balance, I carefully navigated over ice-covered rocks and through the moving current. I skied 4 miles into the kill site, only to be confronted by a blowdown of spruce and lodgepole pine. Now, I'm a skilled obstacle skier, but this tangle of downed trees was so dense that eventually I had to take off my skis and wade through thigh-deep snow. It was a painstakingly slow process of putting my weight onto my leading foot, transferring my weight, and then punching down through the crust, what we call post-holing. Very slowly, I rose up and sank down, slogging my way along the wolf trail, when Raven suddenly burst up off the ground 75 yards ahead of me, squawking and croaking as they noisily flapped through the trees. That riotous outburst startled me, so I paused to collect myself before post-holing the last few yards to the kill. About halfway there, I vaguely saw a large brown animal get up and disappear into the dense brush. Probably a moose. I'd had the bejesus scared out of me by a moose 2 days earlier, and I wasn't going to be fooled again. I finally came upon the well-gleaned remains of a bull elk with a nice 5x6 point set of antlers. Data! I pulled out my bone saw to cut open the femur so I could visually examine the fat content of the marrow. This visual field method is a quick way to assess the health condition of an elk. White fatty marrow like a soup bone meant the elk was relatively healthy, while red and gelatinous or almost clear marrow approaching the look of apple jelly meant the elk was near starvation as it had burned up the last of its fat reserve. I began jotting notes with a pencil in my waterproof field notebook. Then I went to work with my knife to skin back the carcass, making it easier to look for bite marks and wounds to determine how the animal had died. I filled sample bags and assessed how the large bull had been pursued and killed, and by what carnivore, and I confirmed it was killed by wolves. Then curiosity got the better of me. So I waded through the snow, splashed with raven poop, to where the moose I'd seen running away had been bedded, only to discover that what I thought was a moose was actually a grizzly bear. Gulp. The bear had been resting next to the dead elk while feeding on it. I sucked in my breath, my pulse quickened, and I looked around to see if Mr. Grizz was waiting to pounce on me. Nope. I went back to detailing how far the wolves chased the elk, how old the elk was, and how many wolves there were. The femur marrow was red and runny, so the elk was starving. The carcass had been 95% consumed by the wolves, bear, and ravens. The fact that there was little food value left on the carcass was my saving grace, and the reason I had not been charged by a grizzly intent on defending its meal. I packed up my gear and samples and slowly struggled my way back to where I'd left my skis. A chill ran through me as I saw fresh grizzly tracks that crossed on top of my ski tracks. The bear had circled me and examined my tracks, but left me alone. He could have had me for dessert. Fortunately, he chose not to. That was typical of field research and life among grizzlies, despite the terrible tales people repeatedly tell about crazed bears. So I'm open for questions now. Matt and Monica, you can handle however way you want to do that.
All right. Well, thanks so much, Diane, for the presentation and those passages from the book. That was great. And thanks for reading the bear passages. I know there are lots of bear fans in the crowd as well as wolf fans. So we appreciate it. For the Q&A, everyone, feel free to type out your questions, or if you would rather ask them, you can click the raise hand button, and then I can allow you to talk. And you'll just have audio, not video, but you'll be able to ask a question of Diane that way. But Diane, I thought I would just ask one question to kick things off.
Sure.
You mentioned briefly in your slides, and I really admire this in the book, that you wanted it's about science, but it's also a personal story, and it's not written for a scientific audience. And I saw those two threads running through the book. You say at one point, as a biologist, you're a believer in science, but there are also moments where you're not afraid to write more personally about your connection to these animals and the connections other people have to these animals. I was really struck by the scene with Phyllis the wolf up in Canada, and your thought that there was something stronger than reason passing between her and one of the characters in the book. So my question is, what role do you think each of those perspectives, the scientific stick to the data perspective and the personal perspective that allows for more emotion, what do you think, what role does each have as we continue to try to protect these species?
That's a great question. I think, well, I'm certain that we have to use good objective science to learn how to better conserve these species. We have to know what their ecological needs are, their reproductive needs, their food needs, so we can try and conserve the right habitats and be able to give this information to the public. The second part of that question, getting the information to the public, is the crux of succeeding. And it's done not through academic articles and scientific papers. It's done through reaching people through Vital Ground presentations, through memoirs, through articles in National Geographic. Doug Chadwick's books are classic examples of a brilliant writer conveying good science through stories. And Doug was, really motivated me to write this book. So I feel they're two things that contribute to conservation of all wild species. You're on mute.
Thank you. That's great. And I can certainly attest to Doug blending the two very well, just as you do in your book, Diane. So just turning to some questions that are starting to come in. since I mentioned the wolf Phyllis in the book, we have one question about Phyllis. For those who don't know, Phyllis has a great story in the book, and is eventually, as she grows older, leaves the pack that she spent much of her life with. And so Franny is asking, is it typical for an elderly wolf to be pushed out of or leave the pack? Um, and wondering if she actually babysat pups after she was no longer the dominant female. That was, I think, part of it as well.
That's a great question. And I think some of those questions can be answered by observations from Yellowstone, but I have some insights, be it a bit remotely, because we didn't directly watch these wolves like you can in Yellowstone. It's hard to watch wolves in a dog hair lodgepole forest without imposing on their behavior. So Phyllis, I don't know what kind of a style as a leader she had, but she was the breeding alpha female for years. And at one point, she was deposed and ends up wandering up to Canada, where she spent her last elderly years. Unlike another wolf who I talk about in the book, 8756, who was born into a pack, and she stayed with that same pack until she was 11 years old, which is incredibly long for a wolf. Most wolves don't make it. Average lifespan is 4 years, 4.3 years in the wild. So when 8756 was deposed by a different breeding female, 8756 was allowed to stay in the pack. And I don't know what role she could serve because she wasn't real physically sound anymore. When we recaptured her last year, her toenails were curled around the end of her toes, and she was quite crippled with arthritis, and it indicated that she was not actively participating in hunting or helping provision the pack in any way, and yet they can continue to support her. And I suspect her primary role, was babysitting young pups. She could sit with those pups while the other wolves went off and hunted. Very different styles and fates for two old female wolves that had been the dominant animal. But all we can do is interpret what we learned through tracks and behavior, but it's very touching. And again, Yellowstone work, and some of Rick McIntyre's books, he talks about that. And those would be good things to read if you want to learn more.
Great. Yeah, there's so many great stories of different wolves and packs, and so many great books about it, yours included, Diane. We have one of the questions that came in earlier on. Someone who said that they thought the chapter about the public meeting in Trout Creek was very moving and powerful. And I'd reiterate that it's a great, unsentimental portrayal of the different stakeholders on the landscape. And so this question is about ranchers and wondering if ranchers are financially compensated for livestock killed by a wolf, and whether that's equal to what they would receive if they sold that livestock.
That's a very complex question. So ranchers can be compensated and are compensated for wolf kills in the state of Montana, along with grizzly bear kills and lion kills. And part of the problem with the wolf kill, if you have a small calf, newer, younger calf, and you got a pack of 8 or 9 wolves feeding on it overnight, oftentimes there's no carcass to look at. And in order for a rancher to be paid, they have to be confirmed wolf kills. Well, there's nothing left to eat. So that can cause an underrepresentation, and certainly does, of what wolves are killing. But more importantly, in terms of, I think, the rancher's perspective, the ones I've talked with, is they said, we've been breeding this cow for 4 generations of our family. It's our genetic line, it's our trademark, it's our lifestyle. And the market value, pounds of meat times so many dollars, does not equate to what this animal is worth. It's a big investment. So I can't argue with that. Fortunately, wolves don't depredate cattle very often. It's like there's 3 million cows in the state of Montana, 185,000 sheep, and less than 0.00001% of livestock are killed by wolves. So it's a really small problem, but if it's your livestock, it's a big problem.
Great nuanced answer. Got a question, um, kind of in that same neighborhood, just about um, being out there with wolves, whether you carried a weapon, what kind of protection you had when you were out studying wolves, and did you ever have to use it against a bear or wolf or have other close calls?
Another good question. My weapon was my common sense, and I have radar detector for the kind of things when you're out in the wild. This is mostly all we did all this work before bear spray. We did this field work before GPS. There was no in-reach devices. There was no way to locate yourself except using a compass and a map. You crossed frozen creeks that were partly open. You just had to really have your wits about you and be prepared. Carry extra things in your pack if you were stuck out overnight unexpectedly. So we carried no weapons, no shotguns, no bear spray, no, and nobody ever got hurt.
Common sense goes a long way.
It does.
Um, Question from Stephanie, going back to the beginning for you, Diane. Stephanie's wondering how young you were, um, and how you first became interested in wolves and why you chose them to study.
Okay. In my book, I have a chapter called Minnesota Inspirations, and I explain all that. But I basically grew up in Minnesota, which in the 50s and 60s was the only state in the lower 48 that had wolves, with the exception of Isle Royale, which is technically Michigan. I was fascinated by them. I used to go up to the Boundary Waters canoe area and camp by myself with my little scruffy dog and hope to hear them. But the thing that really sealed it for me was Dr. Dave Meach, who is the preeminent wolf researcher in the world. He's still alive and still doing writing. His office was on my campus at the University of Montana. I had enrolled originally in pre-veterinary medicine, and I was on the St. Paul campus, and I found out his office was on the same campus, so I started bugging him and bugging him and bugging him, and I was just this kind of pesky 18-year-old girl who was interested in wolves, and eventually he allowed me to start doing volunteering on his program. I became a technician for the summer field work up in northern Minnesota, and I dropped my major as a veterinary student and became a wildlife biologist. And then I followed my path through Minnesota and ended up coming west in 79. It's taken me all over the world. I mean, been in Romania, Italy, Ellesmere Island, Canada, doing wolves. It's really been remarkable.
Well, this question from Kim touches a bit on your motivations as well. Uh, Kim writes that she's thinking that grizzlies symbolize something for us greater than ourselves, something that humbles us as humans. And there's a lot of mythology about wolves too. What do you think wolves symbolize?
That's an interesting question because when I first started doing work, wolves, the only place they lived was in the very remote wilderness areas. So when I came west, I had this idea that wolves represented and symbolized wilderness. And as they've expanded, I realize now they represent resilience. It's been a remarkable change in my perspective. I mean, they will live anywhere that we will tolerate them. They'll live in any habitat. They once ranged from the Arctic to Mexico. They'll eat anything on the landscape. And so of all the animals out there, resilience and intelligence is really where it comes from. But we always associate them with wild places, but heck, they live pretty close to Missoula, Montana and Kalispell, really. And they're remarkably tough.
Yeah, I thought your details in the book about European wolves living in much tighter confines and closer contact with humans, but still making it through their wits was really telling.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, there essentially is no wilderness in Western Europe. I don't know if you've ever been there, but the wolves managed to hang on in Spain, living out in agricultural areas. It's really remarkable.
Hmm. Okay, looking at some more questions. Nelson is wondering about habitat restoration. And I can answer part of your question, Nelson, if there are any ongoing projects in Montana dealing with bear or wolf habitat restoration. The answer is yes. Vital Ground is leading a few of them, and there are far more and larger habitat restoration projects out there. One good example that we have done on a few of our project sites is building what are called beaver dam analogs to reestablish wetlands and turn habitat that had been converted to agriculture back to a more diverse wetland environment by using these beaver dam analogs, basically imitation beaver dams, to create pools and wetlands. And the goal with that is ultimately to have beavers come back themselves and do it. But that process creates a much richer ecology in the area where you get a lot of different plant and animal species coming back, and that positively impacts everything all the way up to the predators. But Diane, I think you could maybe speak to any work that's being done in your world, or what habitat restoration to benefit wolves might look like.
So wolves need only three things for their habitat. Number one, they need wild prey that's larger than they are. That's how they've evolved. Number two, a space to raise their young where they can survive. And number three, freedom of persecution from humans. It really does not have anything to do with landscape markers like we think of, or avalanche chutes for grizzly bears in the spring, or, you know, anything like that, because they will live anywhere that we will tolerate. You got to remember, they lived in every state in the lower 48 prior to us wiping them out. They lived in the deserts of Nevada. They lived in northern Minnesota. The red wolf lived in the swamps of Florida. I mean, yeah. So for habitat, if you protect and preserve things for grizzly bears, the wolves will fall under that. But I don't believe they're actually, well, I should say I don't believe. You don't need to protect habitat for wolves because they'll live anywhere, but you do need to set up good management strategies and legislation to protect them so that we don't wipe them out again.
All right. Good question here from Boyd Mitchell. Wondering if lone wolves ever get attached and or form a relationship with humans or communities.
That's a really great question. Phyllis, you have to read the chapter at the end. There's kind of a special relationship there between Phyllis and an indigenous fellow. It's not like they're buddies. It's just sort of a respectful relationship of survival on both their parts, I would say. But wolves do not buddy up to humans normally. No. There's an interesting, if you want to read about an exception, there's a wolf that lived by Juneau, Alaska named Romeo, and you can Google the story. This wolf would come into the community basically just outside of town and cavort with dogs. There's many pictures of this gigantic black wolf playing with Labrador retrievers and such. It never killed any dogs, and it would be there in the winter, and then in the summer it would be gone. So I imagine when they saw it, it appeared to be a lone wolf, and it never had other wolves with it. But lone wolves, generally, wolves are not made to survive as a lone animal. They're evolved to be a pack animal. And if a wolf is a lone wolf, I suspect their lifespan is shortened. It's just not a good strategy when you're trying to bring down something that's 2 to 3 times bigger than you are. So it's an interesting concept, though. But no, they don't buddy up to people.
Good reminder, those exception stories that they're individuals too. We hear that
Yes.
in bears a lot. They
Yes.
each have their own personality and their own quirks.
Yes.
A question from Ted Carasoti, fellow writer and great Vital Ground supporter. Hi, Ted.
Hi, Ted.
He says, "Thanks for your years of work, Diane. Do you ever miss living in your cabin on the North Fork?"
I do. And I go up there a lot. I'll probably be up there over Christmas to visit. I used to live there full time and visit Kalispell, and now I live in Kalispell and visit my cabin. But the reality is, it's way off the grid. I don't have any running water, so I melt snow or haul water in buckets. I cut my own firewood. It's not plumbed. There's no electricity. And I'm going to be 71 in a month or so. So the reality of me living there full time now is not there anymore, but I do visit it as often as possible. And I have trail cameras up that I just love to check because I have so much wildlife on my place. But I do miss those good old days. And writing this book, A Woman Among Wolves, was such a great memory lane walk sort of thing. And I try to capture the feeling, the sight, the scent, the sound of being there. And yeah, and look at old photos. So I'm not dead yet, but I probably wouldn't choose to live there full time anymore.
Well, it's certainly a great place to visit. I can attest to that, and we're lucky to go up there occasionally for our projects that are there.
Yeah.
And I can just speak to the magic of the North Fork. The first time I went up there and went for a hike, I saw Wolverine tracks for the first
Oh
time.
my gosh.
It's a special
Wow.
place, certainly.
It is a special
Um,
place.
so Boyd, who asked the question about wolf and human relationships, has his hand raised. So I'm gonna just unmute Boyd for a moment. He might want to ask a follow-up question.
So this is actually Sally. I'm on Boyd's computer. Hi, Matt. Great to
Hi,
see you.
Sally.
And Diane.
Boyd's
Hi,
here too.
Boyd's here too.
Hi,
So
Boyd.
Diane, it was me at the Vital Ground event, and I'm super excited to read your book. So my question is more of a personal nature. Having been friends with Doug and Lynne and Sasha and the family for several decades, we have continued to support wolf hybrids and wolf. I have a little wolf right now who Lynn and Doug said, wow, that's really high content. But our second wolf, when I brought him over, Doug and Lynn wanted us to bring him over. And this was at the time when they had 14 wolves in the compound.
Mhm.
And Lynn had me carry this little wolf Echo. And I carried around to each one of the wolf, cages, and they they could smell his puppy breath, so they accepted him and they licked him, etc. When I went past Bart, and you can't see me, so I can't really show you the motion I'm making, but Bart, if you've met Bart, he makes that motion with his head where he's like, bring it in, when you have like bring it in. And I was wondering if that was because he recognized this little wolf as a future predator. What if you had any insights with the whole bear and wolf thing? I could ask Doug and Lynn, but I'm really curious in asking you that question. Makes sense.
Well, thanks for the question, but I can't tell you what Bart's
Can't hear you.
thinking.
I'm not quite sure how to help you with that.
I don't know what that is, echo, but what I'm saying, what are we getting an echo? I think, Boyd, you have to mute there you go. That's better. I can tell you, I cannot answer for Bart. I don't know what Bart's thinking, and he can't tell us. So I think assuming captive wolves and hybrids are anything like a wild situation of a wolf bear interaction is probably not reasonable. No offense intended whatsoever, but I can't tell you. I can't speak for it. In the wild, no adult male grizzly bear would be presented with a young wolf pup. It doesn't happen. So I don't have an answer. Sorry.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Sure.
Uh-huh.
All right, thanks, thanks, Diane, and thanks, Sally and Boyd. Couple more questions that we'll have time for. We had a few questions kind of turning toward our current political moment, and we'll start with one from the good folks from Durango, Colorado, the Bear Smart Durango program. And they're wondering what your thoughts are on the reintroduction program in Colorado, and whether it can continue to grow in a rough political climate.
Holy smokes, that's a $64 million question. I'm a believer in letting nature take its course, and we can assist when needed. Wolves have gotten to many of the other states through natural recovery, through dispersal. They've returned to all of Western Europe through natural dispersal without reintroduction. Wolves were getting to Colorado before the reintroduction. The first one documented in 2004. I think there were 7 documented prior to reintroductions. And the argument is made that, yeah, but they didn't make it. Well, wolves did reproduce in Colorado in 2020. And it's really, nobody knows. We can't say because now they've been reintroduced. But I feel that in about 2020, Colorado was right on the cusp of where we were in the North Fork in the 1980s. You have one pack. It has a tenuous existence because it's one pack. And if either the breeders gets killed, who knows? Eventually, more get there and more, and it hits a critical mass. And Colorado wasn't allowed to let nature take its course and try and hit critical mass before reintroduction had occurred. So we can't say. It's kind of like Yellowstone. Would wolves have gotten there on their own? Well, I believe they would have. They already actually were. If you read my book, there's 2 wolves documented. So what's going to happen with reintroduction? I think it's going to be a real rocky road. A lot of people are going to be upset. A lot of wolves are going to die, and more wolves will survive, and people will just have to learn to coexist with wolves, and wolves will have to learn to coexist with people. They're there. Complicated.
Certainly is. Couple of questions that are focused more on some of the competing, I will say, information out there about wolves on the landscape. So Sue is wondering if you could speak about what are sources of reliable information, and how you respond to folks who seem determined to kill all wolves. This kind of touches on a question Murray had as well, wondering about how you respond to hunters and hunting groups that are adamant that wolves kill too many elk.
Well, it's 6:58. How much time do we have? Because I'm happy to answer the question, but I just want to know. Do we have more than 2 minutes?
Oh yeah, we don't have a hard cutoff, so feel free
Okay.
to
All right.
answer in depth. It's a good
This
question.
is a long question. So there's been a lot of amazing research been done on wolves, good science, Alaska, Canada, the Midwest, Yellowstone, Montana, Idaho. And people can read that stuff. You Google it online. If you really want to get into more of the science, go to Google Scholar and type in your subject field and you can read the academic papers. If you want to read more gray literature that's still objective but a little easier to digest, I'd suggest going to the International Wolf Center, or my book. Thanks for the plug, Matt. International Wolf Center, it's wolf.org. Yellowstone, Google Yellowstone Wolf Research. You can read, they put out a lot of information. And you can follow some of the different nonprofits. Rocky Wolves of the Rockies has got good information. I find sort of equally unhelpful to wolves being on the landscape is either extreme view of the wolves have saved Yellowstone and we can't kill any of them, to we got to kill all the wolves because they're eating our elk. So we have to be in the middle someplace. So there's a lot of good sources out there. And regarding hunting, wolves regulate their own populations. If they hammer the prey, or if we have extreme winters, and so wolves have it pretty easy, they follow the next year with starvation because there's not much game. And wolf populations regulate themselves, like Yellowstone. There's been about 100 wolves for more than a decade, regardless of how many are killed, how many are born. And before our European colonizers came to North America, nobody was killing wolves. And it was like the Serengeti out there. There was more wildlife than ever with nobody regulating wolf populations. So it's sort of, I hate to use the word ridiculous, but it's rather poor judgment to think that the wolves are eating too many elk. or deer. And if you go to the Montana Fish, Wildlife and Parks website, you'll see that most of the elk management units in the state of Montana anyway are over objective. They got more elk than they want, and many of those units are full of wolves.
All right. Kind of on a similar note, comparing what's going on in a few different states and parts of wolf country. A question wondering how what the current protections in Montana are for bears and wolves, and do you think that will change in the near future? And are they more or less protected in Canada?
So I'll take the last part first. The wolves are not real protected in Canada because there's not a lot of humans on the landscape. So there's a lot of wolves in places that never see people. So they have some protections in some places, yes, but most places, nah. Down here, what was the first part of that question? I got so wrapped up in the second part, sorry.
What the current protections are for bears and wolves in Montana, and if you think that will change in the near future.
Well, that won't take long. There's not very many protections for wolves in Montana or Idaho or Wyoming, except within national parks. Right now, each person who buys a wolf license in the state of Montana, and there's an unlimited number of wolf licenses sold, each person can take up to 30 wolves per year, 15 by hunting and 15 by trapping. You can shoot them 24/7. You can shoot them at night with electronic calls and spotlights. It's war on wolves again, basically, and that's just happened in the last 3-4 years. A lot of legislators and top administrators in the state of Montana want to reduce wolf populations. The wolves keep cranking out more pups in response to that, so they don't have much. They don't have much going for them in the state, in the western states. But the bears now, they're still listed. There's a big push to delist grizzly bears. There's a big fight over it. Wolves and bears have both met the goals, target goals for what a viable population is. However, bears are in different isolated islands of populations, and that's the difference. Wolves are now all connected because wolves are great dispersers and travelers, bears less so. And bears have a lot longer reproductive cycle, takes them many years to produce a litter of cubs, and they hang on to them. Wolves have a litter every year and they have many pups. So they're very different animals. But yeah, if you can Google state of Montana information about where wolves are at. Follow Chris Serene, does a bunch of posting. He used to be the grizzly bear coordinator for the Rocky Mountains, and he retired, and now he's become more of an advocate. And it's very interesting, but it's very concerning what's going on with bears. Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll do just a couple more. One that's pretty quick, but a cool question about red wolves in North Carolina. If you could just speak for a moment to the recovery program there. And Franny was wondering if they're in the mountains or if they're in another part of the state.
The red wolves?
Yeah.
So the red wolf is an indigenous species. It's not a gray wolf. It's a different species, and it's been here a long time, according to the genetics work. It is not a hybrid between a gray wolf and a coyote, which was thought that by some early researchers in genetics early, but now they've done a lot more refined work. So the red wolf is a unique species of animal that is sort of halfway between coyotes and gray wolves, closer to gray, in terms of its ecological needs. It's a smaller animal. It preys on smaller prey. And it used to live throughout the Southeast, Alabama, Georgia, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, all of the Southeastern US. So what happened was it got wiped out through land development, agriculture. People trapped and shot the heck out of them. And then the few that were remaining ended up hybridizing with coyotes. It was a pretty sad story. And they were down to a year or two ago, down to 17 red wolves in the wild. And many scores or hundreds in captive programs elsewhere, but it's really difficult to return a captive raised animal to the wild. But right now, this year, they've been doing better than they've done in a long time. But a lot of people, they get shot and mistaken for coyotes. They've been run over by cars. They're really, really struggling. But and the nice thing that's just happened, I think 3-4 years ago now, was there was a report of these unusual looking coyotes out near Galveston, Texas, in the island, and they took photos of them, and they look like a cross between a coyote and a red wolf, and they did the genetics on it. If you want to look it up, look up Bridget von Holt. She's a geneticist. They found a whole lot of red wolf DNA in these large wild coyotes, and so there's a possibility to use that population of wolves to help boost and enhance the small bottleneck population in the southeast, because the red wolf genes that have showed up in these Texas coyotes are different. They're unique alleles that aren't found much in the red wolves. So it's a great opportunity to conserve a really amazing species, and we have the tools to do it. We get people to quit shooting them, and if they'd stop interbreeding with coyotes.
Yeah, the whole hybrid question is such a fascinating one. I think it really
It is.
gnaws at our human instinct to draw hard and fast lines and classify
Yeah,
things as one thing or the other. But
yeah.
thanks for that question, Franny. One more nuts and bolts question, then we'll go to a couple that'll help wrap things up. But Stephanie, this question's about livestock guardian dogs. Stephanie is a former director of the Anatolian Shepherd Club, and wondering what your feelings are about the proper use of livestock guardian dogs, and do you feel that they are effective?
Yes. So they're really effective against coyotes and other predators, and they can be effective against wolves unless the wolf pack's really large. And from what I've read of people who worked with wolves, especially in Idaho, when they were putting out Great Pyrenees and Anatolia Shepherds and, all these other types of breeds, there's many now, that oftentimes a single guard dog working could not withstand the onslaught from a big pack of wolves. And so they tried putting out more than one guard dog, and that had some good effects. But I've seen a lot of pictures of dead guard dogs that wolves have destroyed. So I think we have to rethink the use of these dogs, what they were bred for. My understanding, and perhaps Stephanie can tell me differently, but were these breeds were developed in the Eastern Europe and Russia and parts like that. They were developed against smaller wolf packs, against less animals, and they're very effectively used there. But they also have shepherds. We've totally lost the shepherd paradigm to have a human out with the dogs out on the landscape. And that really is really important. The best tool to keep wolves out of livestock is to have a shepherd or a range rider. That's been shown time and time again for wolves and bears. So
Nice. All right. We'll do two more questions that'll help close things up for tonight. One from Victoria. Are you hopeful that large carnivores will continue to exist on the landscape given the current political atmosphere?
oofta, that's a whole nother webinar. But I am always hopeful. And the other thing is, they adapt to us. I mean, look at where grizzly bears were when I showed up in 1979 in Montana. We were still legally shooting them as a game species in Montana. It was awful. And there weren't very many. They're showing up and learning how to live amongst humans in the Swan Valley and everywhere. If you look at fascinating work done with radio color grizzlies moving from around towns and through human occupied habitat, they do it at night. If we just don't shoot them, wolves are the same way, that they will continue to persist as long as they have some wild places to raise young and we don't kill them. There'll be a few problem animals that have to probably be managed. But I feel strongly nature will persevere. I'm not rose-colored glasses. I get really angry with a lot of the onslaught of hatred against wolves and the desire to kill more, and grizzlies too, but they seem to be holding their own. But with that caveat is that we successfully wiped out every last wolf in the West in about a 50-year period. So we have to be careful.
Mhm. All right, we had one late question come in that might be a quick one, and then we'll wrap up. Murray's wondering what you think about the Wood River Wolf Project efforts, if you know about that.
So I lived in Idaho, worked for the Nature Conservancy briefly in 2014, 15. I only know a little bit about it. There was a few ranchers involved that were very progressively minded, but I really don't know much about it. And he can explain it or we can move on, but I have not been following it since then.
We'll do some homework on that one, Murray. Thanks for bringing it up. So last question of the night that's a nice way to end that I think kind of echoes how you turn at the end of the book toward the resilience of the wolves themselves. From our friends down in Durango, they're wondering if you have a special favorite, either a favorite or a magical experience or encounter, just one special experience with a wolf or wolves that you can share to wrap things up.
I've had so many.
Mhm.
Probably one of the most magical, I talk about it in my chapter called Sage. We had a wolf that eventually we captured and collared and we named him Sage. But prior to that, there was only Kishnina and her surviving pups. That was all of the wolves in the North Fork. And one night at my rustic little primitive cabin at Moose City, I heard wolf howling. It was still daylight. I shouldn't say night, like late afternoon. I heard a wolf howling, and there were so few wolves. I opened my door and I looked out across the North Fork of the Flathead River. It was in November, and there was snow, and the leaves were off, and there was a gray wolf staring at me, half hidden in the willows, staring at me. And it howled again, and I was looking at it. It was such a magical moment for me. I was new to the North Fork. This wolf came to me, and I watched it, and then it simply disappeared back into the willows. And I see it when I'm describing it. That was a pretty magical moment. And then Sage and I continued to cross paths for many years. If you read the chapter, you'll know the rest.
Mhm. That's great. Well, thanks for sharing that, and thanks for sharing so many other great stories tonight and in the book. So that will just about wrap it up. Thanks everyone for your great questions. Really, really nice conversation here tonight, and I just want to thank Diane Boyd again so much for joining us. For those who have not read the book yet, it is a great read for any wildlife lover. Put it on your shopping list, and you can buy a copy and help support Vital Ground in the process on our site if you'd like to do that. Or I always support going out to your local bookstore and giving them some support as well and looking for the book there. You can even request that they order it if they don't have it in stock. So yeah, Vital Ground. I think most folks on the call are on the webinar are familiar with Vital Ground, but if anyone isn't, just a reminder that Vital Ground is actively working to protect the habitat that grizzly bears and of course wolves and so many other species need. As Diane so eloquently put it, grizzly bears, unlike wolves, have these isolated populations still. They aren't as quick to disperse and connect. And so Vital Ground is working hard to protect the most important areas where grizzly bears can reconnect their isolated populations. And we couldn't do it without your support. We've got several great projects that are about to wrap up at the end of the year here. And your contributions to Vital Ground are making that habitat protection possible and the great conflict prevention work that our partners are doing on the landscape as well. So thank you so much for your support of Vital Ground. And thanks again, Diane, for a great evening. Any final thoughts you wanted to share with folks before we sign off?
No, but I'm very encouraged by the questions and the turnout, and I would encourage people to join, support Vital Ground. I would encourage people to vote, be educated about your various people who to develop your laws. I've seen a tremendous downturn in political savvy here in Montana. I vote, but I wish more people read up and became educated. And I just want to thank Matt and Monica and all of Vital Ground for doing your great work. Like, congratulations, over 1 million acres protected. It's awesome. It started with Zeus's and Chadwick. It's a single person can make a huge difference, and I want people to feel that they make a difference.
Well, thank you, Diane. We really appreciate it, and we appreciate all that you've done for wildlife through your great career as well. So thanks for joining us for a great evening, and thanks everybody. We hope you have a great holiday season, and um, continue to follow Vital Ground on our email and our social media, and we'll have some great stories of more habitat protected coming at you soon. Take care, everyone. Have a good night. And you can let folks who couldn't make it tonight know we'll be posting the recording here to our YouTube tomorrow. So pass it along and spread the great love for wolves, for grizzlies, for wildlife, and for all the good work ahead. Thanks a lot and have a good night.
Thank you. Good night.